This is episode 14, and let's look at the first article. So the first article, it's from Monese, probably the top research company right now. They do a lot of interesting stuff, but you also have to pay for some of them. And this article is about one lady that says goodbye source text. So this lady is Giulia Tarditi. She's head of localization at Monese, and she awed everyone during the Process Innovation Challenge at LocWorld, where she presented a different approach that she named Goodbye Source Text. So what is this all about? So Giulia and her team ended up scrapping the whole idea of having source text to begin with. Instead, the content design team at Monese creates a brief which describes the functionality of a button or a screen within the app. From there, it is the linguist's responsibility to imagine what the best translation would be. The critical point behind this idea is that the linguist's imagination is not hindered by the original source text. Essentially, they are the end users of the app. Giulia and her team have leveraged negative user feedback, filtering in through customer services to pilot this new method for two languages, Romanian and Bulgarian, and they have done it to great success. They concentrated their efforts on the first few screens a potential end user has to go through in the Monese app. The resulting translation has led to a sizable increase in user conversion. At the same time, the series of improvements to the workflow has the team on track to reduce localization costs by 80%. So, when I was reading this for the first time, there are a couple of things that I'm going to be challenging a little bit. I know that I have not achieved anything. I wasn't appraised by anyone for coming up with some revolutionary idea. But basically what this means, if you are as a translator who doesn't get the exact source text, but you just get a brief, basically means that you're kind of like a copywriter, because you have to basically write the copy from scratch. So it is true that you are not hindered by the original source text, which actually, where the quality might not be super great. It depends on the English copywriter, but also maybe it kind of like limits like how you would naturally describe like a button or like a feature or like a screen, if you could just start like from scratch in your own native language. So this is definitely an interesting approach. To me, it's kind of like the next step. Next step after Transcreation. So for Transcreation, you still have a source text, but you are kind of like free to adapt it, and you should adapt it. And you can bend it, you can change it. So this one is, you have no source text and you just start with a blank slate. But the problem that I see here actually is that the people who usually write the documentation, or actually in this case, because they're talking about conversions, so it's like marketing copy that's highly visible on the landing pages and throughout the, sign up process or the payment, the checkout process. I think that you usually need to have like a certain skill, and you definitely need to have like a little bit of like marketing background, like especially like copywriting would be really helpful, so that you can actually produce something reasonable from scratch if you don't have the source text. But with this approach, because like we are talking about NMT in almost every episode. And there's like this idea that maybe translators will need to change their role if NMT becomes really, really good. So this could be actually one of the ways how they could adapt to NMT. So for content that's like really highly visible and highly critical to some of the business goals, instead of just referencing to the source text, these new translators / copywriters could just get like a brief which describes what certain features are about, what is the goal of the page or the button, and it will be up to them to write a copy from scratch in the native language. The second part that I read is so they concentrated their efforts on the first few screens a potential end user has to go through in the Monese app. So if they're talking about potential end user, it means it's someone that still hasn't signed up or like completed the registration process. So they're just learning like about the app. It's really like the top of the funnel place, for example, like landing page. And the resulting translation has led to a sizable increase in user conversion. So this is the fun thing that I forgot to say. So this is a quote from her. I'd rather spend 90% of our localization budget on the 15% of content which drives conversion. So this is like a nice thing, especially like if you say that you have was there a metric for like how much they increase the conversion? I'm trying to find it now. I cannot see it. So what I wanted to say is that this is basically not a new thing. It's about defining the scope of localization. So of course, if you increase your efforts and you, let's say hire like better translators that can do like copywriting from scratch, and you just have them focus on the few pages that lead to conversion, of course you're going to see an increase because you're putting much more effort and resources and money onto those few key areas. But then the question is, if you increase budget, like she's saying, like she would like to spend 90% of the localization budget, which drives conversion. But what happens after that? Like conversion is just like the first initial step of getting a user. But once the user converts, whether it's just like he signs up, or if they track conversion as somebody who like registers for signs up for like a monthly subscription plan. I'm not sure what their app actually does. Be free to work, whatever. So the question is like, what happens after the conversion? Like after the conversion, you still, especially if you provided like such a good quality during the conversion process, the thing that I'm challenging is what will be the quality after the conversion. Because like you can convert someone, but then it's all about retention and loyalty. And if you spend 90% of your budget just to get somebody converted, then my question is what the quality will be like after the conversion process. Like all the text that's visible to the user after they convert, which probably is the day-to-day usage of the app or your service, then if you spend 90% on the conversion part, you're technically left with 10% of your budget to cover the rest. So even if you drive up the conversion rates through increased effort and spending on the pages that lead to conversion, the question is, how will the retention rates look like if the rest of your site or app is pretty much crap, or it's like significantly worse than the first impression that the customers got when they converted. Okay, let's continue with the article. Where localization meets user experience. If we take a step back, it's not necessarily about a localized end product. The effort to localize should go hand in hand with improving user experience. Positive UX then drives conversion. Imagine a localized app which has better conversion rates in English than in German. On the one hand, a German user base exists precisely because there is a localized version of the app. On the other hand, it's not growing quite as fast as the English one. In Julia's own words, bad UX often comes from poorly translated content. It's this idea of integrating localization upstream and influencing product development that Julia was able to act upon in one of her earlier stints as the head of localization at Badoo. At Badoo, she says, I wanted to move localization from customer services into product development. What I did was I looked at big companies such as Google or TripAdvisor to see where localization was integrated there and whether it was successful. The idea was to work on localization becoming a factor for growth. During her time at Badoo, she helped grow the number of supported languages of the platform up to 43, while doubling conversion and boosting revenue by up to 10 times in mid-tier markets. I need water. Give me a marker, please. So this part I can definitely support, like moving localization from customer services into product development, so more upstream. That's definitely a very good approach that I think most of the companies still have to go through. I think in episode 12 we covered tactics how to evangelize globalization. It was article from Bruno Herman, and I think there's like closer collaboration with other teams and involving localization, involving localization from early stages, or like from the whole inception of the idea of a product until the product is like on the market. That I think it's something very important, so that localization is not just like seen like, oh hey, I just need to translate this because like we're going into new markets, or like we have customers in like China or whatever, but it's really more like a concentrated and like a strategic approach, like from the very start. So yep. Okay, let's continue. Challenge. What challenge? Only IT giants such as Amazon or Google really have the resources for constant experimentation. Opportunities to try something new don't come around often. Julia agrees, saying that it takes a specific leader to convince the team to try it. A track record of developing localization programs at different companies helps to get buy-in too. Everything needs to change at Monese, Julia says. Even the way we do English. If all languages are created from a brief, English has to be produced at the same time as the other languages. We had to design a custom workflow and a custom issue type in Jira to keep track of this process. So, a couple of things. Saying that only Amazon or Google has resources for constant experimentation. I think that's not true. Of course, the question is how expensive the experimentations are, but like in this case, like if you basically just scrap the whole source text and you just give your translators like a brief, I don't think that's like a very expensive experiment. I think the problem actually with the IT giants and like with big companies in general is that they are afraid to experiment because they're fine with just what has been working so far, and unless something is going really wrong, or maybe they have like an impulse or like a feedback from the end users that something is wrong, which could point back to localization, then they don't have any reason to try to experiment and innovate. And and actually, if you're listening, if you're like a stable listener, if you listen to the podcasts regularly, you know that I have a lot of ideas based on these articles, and I just need to find a place to put them in a practice, which basically means doing all different kinds of experiments. So going back to what I was saying in the intro, that's the reason why I want to create my own content, so that I can do a lot of experiments on that content and share everything with you. And maybe that's one way how we can showcase experimentation and innovation. So the second part where she says Jira, custom workflow, custom issue type. I have been working with Jira since days with Autodesk. I really love Jira and all the Atlassian products. So this doesn't seem like a surprise to me, just to design a workflow and issue type. Yeah, and then she says that English has to be produced at the same time as other languages. So this is a very good point. For example, with Autodesk, and I'm pretty sure that this is like big goal for most of the localization departments at larger companies, and that goal is SIMship, or reducing the delta between English and localized languages as much as possible, so that all the customers around the world get the news or the product or the updates or whatever pretty much at the same time. So with this approach, it's definitely possible, because basically you're creating the source for all languages at the same time. Because if you think about it, if there's no source text, it means that every language has its own source text. Okay, next part. Resourcing and subsequent pricing of localization efforts have been a challenge unto themselves. With goodbye source text, there is no price per word because there is no text to translate. Julia works with freelancers at Monese. They are paid on an hourly basis for the work they put in. When they are onboarded, they need to perform a test to see how they perform without the crutch of a text. Yep, I would be really interested, like, if they are actually looking for translators that have some copywriting experience. And actually, if you think about it, it's like kind of strange, because like the whole copy, especially like the marketing copy, usually needs to follow some brand guidelines. So I'm wondering if the brief that they give to translators, if they also have some, I don't know, brand guidelines for each language, so that the freelancers know kind of like the boundaries or like the tone that they should use, not to translate the source text, but to create a copy from scratch. And I would be really interested in seeing how their onboarding process works like. And actually, why don't we just do some research right away? So I'm going to Google Monese, and I'm going to try to see if they have some job postings for freelancers. So Monese, open a current account in UK. Is that what I do? Ooh. How far are we? Oh my god, it's already 35 minutes. And this is just the first article. Oh gosh. Okay, so I'm loading their page, and everything is actually very slow right now because of the streaming. Where are their career pages? There we go. There should be somewhere here. Company careers. That's that. Let's see. Come on. Join us. Okay. Anti-money laundering positions. Okay, commercial, community positions, compliance, customer support. So here we have customer support for different languages, but I assume that's not it. Engineering, finance, general marketing, operations, product, project management. I didn't find it, so I don't know how it looks like. I'm actually thinking that maybe I should just contact Julia and actually have her listen to what I said. I'm pretty sure that they have thought it out and maybe just not clear to me from this short article. So where were we? So yeah, I think earlier in the article it said that they just tested this for 2 languages. I think it was Romanian and Bulgarian, and so their next step is to live test this on all of the 12 languages that Monese currently supports. In effect, this approach lends itself well to a certain content type. Marketing content, for example, works well with this model. Things like push notifications, billboards, or ad campaigns are well suited to this approach. Any other type of content where the text is sufficiently short, meaning it can fit in a single paragraph, will work well too. I don't see this approach viable for all content, certainly not for something like translating a novel. So yeah, of course, like if you have like some huge documentations like we used to translate back in the days, and they still probably exist in some online form, let's say, I don't know, documentation for like Windows 10 or something like that, then yeah, probably that would be like a very costly thing if all the localized versions had to be basically written from scratch, and you would also need like a huge knowledge of the product, which actually brings me back to their whole approach. I think that the translators actually have to kind of like be involved kind of like in the product development, because like, and they should know the product well if they are supposed to be writing the copy. I mean, like if you think about like the general landing pages, like there's just like the unique value proposition, and just like that, you know, like how can a translator come up with a value proposition for like a product or for like a whole startup on their own? You know, maybe they have like a brief, but even then, I don't know. Is there anything else for this article? No.